Let's start off by getting to know these wires that we have. These looks like random looking stuff, but there's some rhyme and reason to this. If you look carefully at these, you'll see a number on these. And we've got a 14-4, a 12-2, and you'll either have a 12-3 or a 14-3. I'll explain those in a second. So start off, you'll notice that there's a slit cut down the middle of these. And normally you'd be doing this yourself, but the tool for this, was just too cheap to buy you one, so I just did this part for you. So what you want to do is you want to just pull back all this paper stuff, and if you have a pair of scissors, go ahead and cut that off, or any other cutting device. This makes a little bit clearer as to what's what. So the first wire is a 14-2, and what that means is it's a 14 gauge 2 conductor, right? 1, 2, wait, it's 14-2. 1, 2, oh yeah, the ground. We don't count the ground. So the bare wires are ground. So it's a 2 conductor, that's the part that's carrying the electricity. The ground is our safety. So 2 conductors, a black and a white, that's our hot lead. That's our neutral. And if you look on the wire somewhere down here, it will actually say 14-2. The next one is a 12-2, and I know this right away just by the color. So the new standard, new for me because I've been around for a while, the yellow cabling tells me that that's a 12 gauge wire. The white cabling, or the white sheath rather, on this tells me it's 14 gauge. So looking over here, I'm guessing that's going to be a 12 gauge too. We'll come to that in a minute. Okay, so this is a 12-2, which means 12 gauge, 2 conductor. Again, 1, 2. We're going to ignore the ground because it's that's the unshielded one. Okay, so this is called a cable because it's made up of 2 or more wires. So we've got a wire, which is this, just the one individual strand, and it's a cable because there's more than one. They're packaged together in another sheathing. If we were to run this in conduit, for example, we wouldn't need this outer sheath because it would be in a metal conduit. That's a topic for another conversation. All right, so we've got our 2 conductor wires here. The next one you'll have is a 3 conductor, and we'll use this later on for our 3-way switch or for our switched outlet. So it's called this is a 12-3, 12 because it's a 12 gauge, as evidenced by the yellow sheathing. And somewhere on here it's going to say, well, right there it says AWG12. It does not say 12-3, but as soon as we strip this open, we can see right away that it is, in fact, a 3 conductor. 1, 2, 3, plus a ground. So we've got our hot lead, our neutral lead, and this would be our switched lead or a second hot lead, depending on how it's set up. All right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to strip these wires. Let's just get this out of the way for a second. See if you can see my floor. You can see this mess I'm making. Look at that, just all on the floor. All right, brand new wire strippers. Need to somehow open these. Oh, that was easier than I thought. I have my scissors already. And on my wire strippers, you can see that it's actually got the wire gauges written on here. Let's take a look at this. So AWG is American Wire Gauge. Gauge is the size of the wire. So a 10 gauge is going to be the biggest one this will strip. The number gets bigger to a 12, the gauge gets smaller. As the number gets bigger, the gauge gets smaller. So the smallest gauge is the biggest number. The biggest gauge is the smallest number. So just got to remember that those go backwards. Now if we're dealing in millimeters, it actually kind of makes sense. As the number gets bigger, the wire gets bigger. But we're in America, so we like to do things backwards. All right, before we strip our wire, we're going to want to use another type of gauge. So we have gauge meaning the wire size, but there's also a gauge meaning like how far do I strip it. And if we look at the back of my outlet has a strip gauge right here. So if I just set my wire right there, that tells me how far I need to strip this. So I think that's 5/8 of an inch. This is a 14 gauge wire, so I'll use the 14 gauge on my strippers, and we'll go ahead and strip that. Using my strip gauge right there, I'm just going to mark it with my finger. Take the 10 gauge mark on my wire cutters. Oh, there's this little guy right here. Unlock. Try that again. So strip gauge on the 14. And we're just going to squeeze in on that. You can feel it cut through. Sometimes you have to rotate a little bit and peel it off. I'm just going to match that to the other side. Right there. Voila. And I might as well just do the whole thing while we're in here. Mark it with my finger. It's important not to have too much wire showing through, because if there's too much wire, that's extra conductor that can then touch another conductor. If these two conductors were to touch inside the box, you'd have a short circuit. So the whole idea is to keep metal from touching metal unless you actually want it to. Go ahead while you're in here and strip all of your wires on all of your cables. So if we're using a 12 gauge wire, we'll use the 12 gauge on here. Use my strip gauge as a guide. And sometimes if you squeeze this too much, it'll stick on the wire, so you have to open up the handle just a little bit to get it to release. So squeeze it, rotate it, open up just a tiny bit, and strip.